hope everyone can hear me. I never understand the transition part, and I apologize for that. I am Brett Yasko. We are, I want to welcome you, first of all, to CMU School of Design's lecture series. We are super excited to have Deb Lee here with us today. Deb is terrific, and I'm a huge fan of her work. Please use the Zoom Q&A or Facebook to put in any questions or comments you have, and we'll try to get to as many as possible after Deb's talk. Before we start, I just want to give everyone a quick reminder that our final lecture series of the semester is next Monday. The time is going to be 4:30 p.m. Instead of noon. It's with James Todd of JD Type Foundry. More information is on the website. And I just really quickly want to thank Darlene Scalise, Joe Lyons, Whitney Friedman, and Bruce Hannigan for all that they do to make the lecture series happen. I also want to thank fellow committee members, Molly Steenson, Diana Chun, Megan Urban, and Jacqueline Syke for all the great work that they do. Jacqueline also designs our posters and all the social media that we have for the lecture series. And today she's going to introduce Deb as well. So Jacqueline, take it away.
Thanks, Brett. Deb Lee is a Korean-American freelance illustrator and graphic novelist. Deb graduated from the School of Design in 2018, where they then shifted their focus into editorial and publishing illustration. They have worked with clients such as The New Yorker, NPR, PBS, Washington Post, Harper Collins Books, Procreate App, and more, and they're set to publish their debut graphic novel in LIMBO in spring 2022. We were particularly excited about Deb's focus on the nuances of trauma, mental illness, and the diaspora. Deb, I've been personally a longtime admirer, and we are so honored to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Okay, should I start sharing my screen now? Okay, let's see. All right, is everyone, we're good? Okay, cool. Let's get started. Okay, hi. I just want to say, like, really quickly, thank you so much for having me. As somebody who was in the School of Design, I was also a part, like, I was in the audience of these lecture series, like 99% of the time. So to be able to speak to the audience now is kind of wild, and it's like, it's such an honor to be here. So thank you again for having me. So to reintroduce myself, I am an illustrator based in Oakland. I'm moving to Brooklyn literally next week, so wish me luck. It's going to be a wild ride. I work mostly in editorial and publishing. So what that means is editorial would be like articles that you would see online or on print, and these are usually like one-time stories about like current events or like science. It can literally be anything, but it's starting to range from like Medium now is becoming really popular, Scientific American, NPR, and others being like the New York Times, the New Yorker. Publishing would be work that is like, I like to compare it to like programming, how there's like the front end and the back end of it. Like the back end is like what you don't see. So like that's like character design or world building. Front end would be like whatever whatever like is shown to the consumer. So book covers, like the interior pages of like a picture book, etc. But that is me in 2021. So let's go back to 2014. So in 2014, I was in high school and I was like so obsessed with drawing. Like I would draw when like my teachers weren't looking. They probably saw me. And I wanted to go to be like an animator or an illustrator, but when you have Asian parents, like they don't let you do that most of the time. So they were like, we need you to, you know, make money. We need you to participate in capitalism and like do something that is like, that like actually like gives you an income. So we like talked it out and we're like, okay, we should go to a school. I should go to a school that is more like academic and has a very strong design program within like an academic space. So I enrolled in Carnegie Mellon, and it was a really good choice for me because there was like a separate design and art school, and I was able to take classes that are outside of the design program if I would like to. And it was just like, you know, a really good place to be in. So my freshman year, we did everything that like freshman design students do, made like animals from plastic and like made instructional drawings on how to like fold cardboard boxes with like without words. Um, and by sophomore year, I think I was like not like peer pressured, but like a lot of my friends started doing like hackathons. So I also started doing those, and we made like apps and everything with some teams that were like had more engineers. I usually was the only designer, so this was a good way to exercise like UX design. Um, and I believe this was the first class, the class of 2018 was the first one um, to have like the new curriculum. So instead of CD and ID, which is communication design, industrial design, we got the program that was communications, products, and environments. I actually started out with environments because I had no idea what environments was. And it sounded really cool because it was super abstract and we were like using our hands to make like physical models. I believe this was an like abstract representation of a cross section of a frozen mango from Trader Joe's. So I made like this whole like spider web thing with like these like air holes from like sort of like similar like you see in bread, and you can't really tell, but it was it was a really fun project, and oof, my hands hurt a lot, but it was worth it. Um, so after sophomore year, I believe it was my hackathon project that got me an internship at IBM Design. And I was a UX design intern there in Austin, and it was great. And then junior year, I started taking on a minor in HCI. So this was more of a like way to like exercise like UX design and UI design potentially. And I also started branching out from the School of Design and doing more like Lunar Gala stuff on the left, and on the right, I started like branching out even further from design and joined AFIO, which is the community service fraternity. And I think that was a really good decision because I think like I needed a way to like, you know, diversify my social circles, and being outside of like, you know, more than just what I was studying was a very good decision for that, for my mental health as well. I also switched from environments to communications design because I realized like, oh, like I think like environments design was like evolving really fast. And I was like, oh, it's like in a place where I'm not sure if I would be super interested in it. So I think I did what like was not super encouraged, and I switched halfway through. So I didn't have like the solid foundation of like typography and everything. So I was kind of like making my way through it. However, I also shot myself in the foot like that because um, I actually had to take medical leave for like half a semester. So I ended up doing 1.5 semesters of environment and a semester and a half of communication design. So, and then it was senior year. So like I pretty much got like it equally when I was intending to have 2 semesters of communication design. Anyway, by the end of my junior year, I took an internship at LinkedIn, and this was a UX design internship for LinkedIn Premium. So I was on the premium team and doing my job, but I also decided to do more like things that were not in the job description, like things that were I was not paid for. Um, so there was an intern fundraising event, and I volunteered to make stickers, and they were very well received within the company. And I noticed that I had like a ton of fun. Like even though I was going out of my way to like take an Uber to the nearest like Staples to like print all my stuff and like hand cut everything, I was having so much fun. And this is what I was really excited about. And I was so much more like excited about this than my, you know, actual job. And looking back, I also was doing the same thing at IBM. So there was a screen printing lab at IBM Design, and I like went out of my way to like ask the person that was running the screen print lab and ask them to teach me how to screen print. So after work, I would like make these designs and we would go into the screen printing lab and like print all of these. And I, again, had a ton of fun doing this. And it wasn't that I didn't like UX design. It was just more of like, I think this feels right to me. And looking back, I was drawing a little bit, but I wasn't drawing as much as I used to in high school, which was like every day, every hour, like every second of my waking life. And I had this sketchbook that I was carrying around in college, and it was mostly just me like filling out a spread every day, and it was all I did when I was actually drawing. Sometimes I would like draw like on my computer, like so I had to like a really rusty Cintiq, and I would sit down and just like draw on it. Sometimes I would draw on paper, but I wasn't very consistent about it really. So it was just like, I don't know, like why am I not drawing as much anymore? Like what happened along the way? So I used my LinkedIn money to buy an iPad because I wanted a tool for something to be more mobile and something I could take it to, like, you know, cafes when that was a thing, to just like keep drawing. And ever since I ever since I got that iPad, I haven't stopped drawing since. So these three were like, I think the first drawings I ever did on my iPad, and it was a game changer for me, and I haven't stopped drawing since. And it was probably one of the best investments I ever made in my entire life, like no joke. So now we're at fall 2017, and I am a senior, and I'm like, oh shoot, like I mean, I already went through 2 internships of UX design, and I'm already kind of bored. And not to say that UX design is bad or anything, it's just like there are people that were more excited about UX design than I think I'll ever be. And I thought, like, you know what, maybe I should change my career. But then it's senior year, so that kind of like, I can't transfer, I can't go elsewhere. So it was kind of like, what do I do? And so sitting down, like I knew it was being serious when I decided to like get a new portfolio link. Like when you get a new domain name, like that's when you know you're being really serious about like a career change or something. So was this the right decision for me? And I think I want to categorize that into 3 different ways. So there's internal feedback, external feedback, and the privileges that I had at my position. So the internal feedback was that I have never felt a drive to be as good as something as I wanted to be, like ever. And I thought about drawing and illustrating like from the moment I woke up. Like I remember waking up in my bed and just staring at the ceiling and be like, what can I draw today? And going back to sleep later that evening, and just I remember just like thinking about drawings. That's all I thought about before I went to sleep. And it was borderline obsessive, but that's when you know that like this is something that I was super serious about. I also had just more pride in my illustration work than I ever did in my UX design work. Like I think if I would go home on Thanksgiving and like show my family, like, look what I did, I would immediately show them drawings and not illustration and not design. External feedback, I have to acknowledge this because I know that this seems very superficial, but if you want like, I think you need both internal and external validation to like make something like make a career feel like right, you know? So external feedback, strangers seemed to like what I was doing. In my previous internships, like my managers who were not illustrators and just other people, like other coworkers were like, oh yeah, like this is pretty good. So that told me like, yeah, I can do this, like this isn't bad. Also, it just helped me to stand out as like a person and a designer, etc. I also feel like this is super important to acknowledge about privileges that I had as a person. So I want to talk about this because a lot of freelance illustrators don't talk about how like what kinds of privileges they had to like get to where they are. So mine were that, you know, when you're a UX designer in Silicon Valley, like it pays really well. And that like was helpful for me to save up in case like I wanted to jump ship and like continue living in the Bay Area, like, and survive. I also had a return offer from LinkedIn UX design, which meant I could shut down my design portfolio and start an illustration portfolio instead. And that gave me a lot of time to like work on a brand new portfolio instead of like finessing my design portfolio, reaching out to apply, go to Confluence, which was a design career fair. And most importantly, I didn't have student debt. So that is also a huge thing that is very quintessential to how I'm able to live as a freelance illustrator. So now I'm back at CMU and I'm like, okay, I won't be getting an illustration degree, but what I can do is like ask around and see like, is there anybody who can help me? Is there anybody who can give me insight on being an illustrator, or like any classes I can take? And I realized that quickly there are none. The art school, you know, as some of us know, is like very conceptual. There's no illustration in the art program, and in the design school, like there was no illustration as well. I took like a figure drawing class in the School of Drama, and I took like a printmaking class in the School of Art. But other than that, I think those were the only two like really like hardcore drawing classes that I could take. So what helped me actually was I asked around. I found some books in Hunt Library, which was like this bookshelf. And I also asked one of the professors, Dylan, if he knew anybody, because, you know, Dylan does photography and like understands like digital, like storytelling through images, if he knew anybody who could help. And he recommended I reach out to this alumni, Samia Ahmed, who became an illustrator after she graduated. Now she works in animation. So she gave me a podcast, and that was super helpful because that podcast, which was called Your Dreams, My Nightmares, like name drops a bunch of publications and people that I could like look up. And I learned a lot from like reading their stories, their articles, and that just like keeps like branching out until I was able to have like a pretty solid idea of how illustration works in like a very surface level way. I was really interested in editorial illustration at the time because the styles were so like there were so many, and it seemed like the more interesting your style was, like the more like successful you might be. And that was my very beginner's level understanding of editorial, like of like the world of like illustration. So that was something that I wanted to do. So unofficially, I started like an independent study with Dylan, and he would give me like a New York Times article or the New Yorker article from like 2004 and would have me illustrate it in a week. And it wasn't for a grade, I just wanted to do it. And this was something that could build my portfolio every week, starting from like a blank slate. So every week I would make something, and eventually my portfolio like grew a little bit. While I was doing that, I was like looking out for any job opportunities. I was sending postcards, which is what you do if you're an illustrator, to art directors, who are the ones who hire illustrators. And literally nobody was responding. Like I think I got like a grand total of 0 emails back. And I think one email was like, hi, like please look at the frequently asked questions or something. It was very low. And I found that like looking back, of course no one's gonna hire me because there's no actual client work on my website. How can they trust like a beginner illustrator who's never worked for a real life assignment to work on their very like frantic like assignments for like that they could hire experienced illustrators for? So yeah, the trust was very low. But if I found that if you find an art director who like is willing to try out working with a brand new illustrator, and you do well, then like that trust kind of grows, and more that trust will like exponentially like grow. However, that does not necessarily mean that the jobs will come like consistently like that. It's very like freelance illustration is very like, maybe you might have 7 assignments in one week, but then you have a dry month, and then you have 14 assignments another week, and like then nobody else contacts you. And it's just the way that I think just like regular gig economy is. And I grew to be okay with that. And like all the while, like you're just confused, and like one day you feel like the best illustrator ever, but like 99% of the time you have like, you're kind of like shuffling around, like, what am I doing right now? So winter 2017, I like have a pretty solid like portfolio. I start working on like a bunch of different mediums. I started to make posters for my friends who were having like their senior recitals, and I started using colored pencil and the risograph and just like experimenting and like messing around really. I started taking a real independent study with Dylan. So this was just me. I like initiated a project where, okay, I want to take the book Life of Pi and I want to make like 4 to 5 like really big illustrations with colored pencil. And these were like 18 by 24. And I was that one person who was in studio on like Friday at 1 a.m. just like working on this. But it was fun. I had a good time. By spring 2018, that's when things started like getting pretty crazy. So I had a pretty, my portfolio at this point had like a diverse set of like drawing styles, and it was like pretty full. Like 3 months ago, I had literally 0 things, and this is when, like as I said, this is like this was the craziest week of my life, and this is when things started to really feel like it was taking shape. So there was an internship that opened up at NPR, and it was an illustration internship. And it was very rare for something like this to happen because there are very little like in-house illustration positions, and for an illustration internship that was in-house and paid for students, like that almost never happens. And NPR like only posts internships when they really need it. So it was not clear when an internship like this was going to open up. So I put everything aside. I analyzed the job description. I like made a brand new cover letter, a brand new resume. I modeled my portfolio to follow that job opportunity because if I knew that there were all these real life illustration students with like 4 years of teaching, like 4 years of like learning how to be a real illustrator, but I've only learned how to be an illustrator for like 3 months, like I have to put like my best foot forward. And I don't know how this happened, but I somehow got the internship. And looking back, it was kind of ironic because when I asked my boss at NPR, like what was it about my application that stood out to them? They said, oh, we really like your typography. So it was like the design, the graphic design of my application that I think like made me stand out in an interesting way. So that happened. Another thing happened, which was to me even crazier, because I applied for the Society of Illustrators student competition with Dylan. And this is like the AIGA of illustration, I think. But it's like a competition where every year teachers send in like their students' work. And usually there are like thousands and thousands of submissions. And Dylan and I like sat down and we realized that we had to register our school because it turns out nobody from Carnegie Mellon has ever applied for the Society of Illustrators. So we had to go through that. And so we submitted our stuff and waited. And then the day after I got the NPR internship, Dylan gets an email saying like, okay, yeah, like out of the 8,000 submissions that came in, the piece made it into the show that was only for 125. And within that 125, like only 25 got a scholarship. And I ended up getting like a pretty decent scholarship from them. And that was just like another moment of like, what the heck? Like how did this happen? And it turned out that there were literally 2 people in the jury who fought so hard for the piece. And when I saw them like after way in the future, I was like, thank you so much for like putting like for like vouching for my piece, because this actually like kind of changed my life. And I'll explain why, is that the Society of Illustrators tweeted about this piece, and the person who saw it was a real literary agent who reached out to me and said like, hey, have you ever thought about working in books? And I was like, no, like not real, like no. And he was like, yeah, like, do you like, we would love to like work with you to make like picture books or graphic novels or anything. And I looked it up and I was like, I don't know. And then I realized that, okay, this literary agency is like very legitimate. So I need to take this. So that is when we started working together. I believe it was like March of my senior year. So this all happened in a week. So I was like on this crazy high, and I don't think I'll ever have a week like that again in my life. So that was ridiculous. So I also want to point out that like all of this happened, but like if I didn't have the work to show for it, like if I didn't start my portfolio like the semester before, I would not have been ready for any of this. Like all these opportunities came up, but they could have just passed by over my head because if I didn't have anything. So it was just like the right time at the right place. The timing couldn't have been any more perfect. NPR especially, I had a free summer. I didn't have anything to do. So that was also a great way to like do something. And it felt like nothing was happening for a while at the beginning. Like I was reaching out to art directors, 0 people were reaching out to me back. And it felt like I wasn't going anywhere, but it was just paying off and I didn't know it. But also I just got like stupid lucky. So summer 2018, I graduated and I started working at NPR. The left is one of like the radio rooms. I don't know what to call it. It's like one of the sound rooms at NPR. Instead of conference rooms, they have like recording rooms, recording studios. And the right is, of course, the tiny desk. A friend of mine and I, who also draws, who was an intern, volunteered to be like live artists for the tiny desk concerts, which happened like almost every day of the week at that point, because like I think the summers are just really packed. So we counted as photographers. So that meant that we had to go in during rehearsal. So we had to be at the front row of all these tiny desk concerts. So we were 5 feet away from these artists like all the time. So if we didn't have meetings, we would go in and we would like stand 5 feet away from the artists behind the cameras and just like draw the artists for like however long they were up there. So that might have been like, if you've seen his tiny desk concerts, they're like 15 minutes long each usually. So we had to go fast. But that was like a really backdoor way to like get to like, you know, be super close to artists like Dave Matthews Band, Yo-Yo Ma, Mac Miller, PJ Morton from Maroon 5. And it was like, again, when am I going to have an opportunity like this? It was the best summer of my entire life. And at the same time, I was doing like actual real live editorial projects. So I had to like really be strategic about my style and like how quickly do I need to move to get all these assignments in. So yeah, like this was my actual job now. Like I'm an illustrator. Like this is real. Like I'm not getting fake articles. Like these are real articles to be published. So that was my 9 to 5. I am exhausted as hell. I still go home and I'm still drawing because we're now working on a picture book idea for actual pitching with my agent. So I'm beat. I'm so tired, but I'm having a grand old time. By fall 2018, I moved to the Bay Area, and this was an interesting transition to me because I grew up in a very predominantly white neighborhood in New Jersey. And I was kind of struck by like how many Asian families were in like the Bay Area. Like I've never really lived there. I noticed that I started having trouble like navigating Korean grocery stores because my mom wasn't there with me. I had trouble going to Korean hair salons because I didn't know how to speak Korean and I was really nervous, and I didn't want to look like a fool, but it just felt really uncomfortable in an interesting way that CMU, even though it has a lot of Asian people, it wasn't the same. So I channeled all of that into a comic where I was talking about my like diaspora, like being unable to speak in Korean to my grandparents, and they don't understand English. So I can't really tell them anything that's happening in my life. So that felt bad. So we channeled that into this, and my agent was like, okay, like this is actually really cool. Like, I didn't know you like doing comics. And I said, I didn't either. Like, I didn't know that this is something I like doing. So we're like, he goes like, do you want to make like a graphic novel about this? And I said, okay, like, I guess I'll do it. And it started out as like a graphic novel about like being unable to talk to my grandparents. But I realized that in order to talk about that, I have to talk about my diaspora as a whole. And if I want to talk about my diaspora as a whole, I have to talk about my messed up mental illness from high school. And if I have to talk about my messed up mental illness from high school, I have to talk about like the abuse in my household. I have to talk about like depression and growing up and my identity. And it was just like, I have to fit all that in. So I can't, it's going to be a big book. So we worked on all of this together, and I made 15 pages for a pitch. I've never worked faster in my life because I wanted this to exist so bad. And my agent's job is to like have all his contacts who are publishers and like just like send them all out. And we ended up like getting a deal with literally my first choice, which again, like, how could this happened if I didn't have an agent, if there weren't those two people in the jury at the Society of Illustrators who vouched for my work? It just, all of these things just like add up, like they like fall over on each other like dominoes. And Connie Shu at First Second has worked on books that were inspirations for this book. So to be able to be part of that lineup was just incredible. And she also bought, not only in Limbo, but she got another graphic novel from me, which we haven't worked on yet, and the picture book that we were working on a while ago. So it'll be like a decade of many things to come. So now I'm really working on this book, and the style has changed. So before it was this, but I redid the pages recently, and now it looks like this. And I like these pages so much more because it's not as dark, like literally, but it's not as dark like figuratively either. And it feels much more nostalgic to work in grays rather than like blacks. These were some other pages that they're more experimental. I think having a design background that, you know, forces you to be a little bit more exploratory and everything was really good for experimentation, and going beyond what traditional comics look like. So these are pages showing like passage of time over the summers. And I think these are some of my favorite pages of the book so far. So now summer 2019, this comic has actually like done a lot more than I expected because an editor reached out and said like, hey, we saw this comic and we have a manuscript at Harper Collins and we think that this should be a graphic novel. Do you want to test it out and see that if this can work as a graphic novel? And I said like, hell yeah. And this was a book about, you know, kids escaping from North Korea. So like emotional Korean, like, yeah, sign me up. Like that's everything that I could ever ask for. So this was a sample spread I gave them, and the acquisitions team at Harper Collins was like, yes, this can be a graphic novel. So then I got another book deal from that comic. And so now I'm working on 2 books, and it was just like, I can't believe this is all happening to me. Like I never thought that this industry would work in my favor, but it is. So that is coming out in 2023 now. So I'm working on these simultaneously with an actual author. So working with an author is obviously a different process than working, you know, alone as an author and illustrator, because you have to go back and forth with the author about their visions for the characters, their like their clothes, like how like their hair goes. Like it gets very like in the nitty gritty, but that is because you are working for an author this time. And these are some of the sketches that we have so far. So I'm I'm working on this book right now, and we're only on the sketching pages. So the next step after this is to actually like copy and like trace it all and then like make the actual real work on top of this. So this is just what we call in the comics industry, the roughs. So now it's 2019, and let's not forget that I still have a full-time job at LinkedIn. I I am a UX designer. That's my job title at LinkedIn, but they actually put me on the illustration team at LinkedIn because they were building one, and it was just me, an art director, and an iconographer at LinkedIn. Product illustration is very different from illustration as a whole because you have to work with not only the art director, you have to work with the other designers, you have to work with developers, you have to work with like business people, sales. There's a lot that happens. And in this illustration style particularly, this was actually given to us in a giant Illustrator file. And my job for a year was to pick and choose and like Frankenstein these new illustrations together. So it was like, it was not that fulfilling. And I think there are people who would really like doing this, but it just was not for me. I also had a really troubling experience with like my manager and like my team and stuff, and like HR got involved and everything. So it was like, I have to get out of here. So after a year, I left and I began working as a contractor at Lyft for illustration. And I loved my team at Lyft. We still talk today, and it's still, but then I realized like maybe it's not exactly the people that makes this hard. Maybe it's just like, this is not the kind of illustration I like doing. In product illustration, you have to work with vectors, which means it's a lot of like clicking and like making curves and stuff with like your mouse. And it just, I don't know, like this is not what I'm used to, which is like using my wrist to like do mark making and everything. So at the same time, I have like 2 graphic novels. I am working on editorial illustration assignments. I'm traveling around the West Coast to go to comic and zine festivals along with my 9-to-5 tech job. So if you've never worked on a graphic novel, one graphic novel is like a full-time job on its own. So have 2 of those and have an actual editorial illustration career, and then traveling and then having an actual full-time job where you have a 401k and everything. So I felt like death. I was not sleeping. I did not have weekends anymore, and I still don't. But it was really tiring because I was staying up until 3 a.m. every day, getting up at 8 a.m., and just, it was really hard for my mental health. So I decided to quit early. I handed in my badge for Lyft. The one on the left is obviously LinkedIn, but I decided by the end of 2019 that I need to be a real illustrator, like a full-time illustrator. So beginning of 2020 is definitely like an interesting choice to start illustration, but like a freelance illustration career. But I think it was okay. Like it ended up being all right. And I'm very thankful for that I had the savings and like the lack of student debt and everything. So let's start talking about projects that I was working on. This was a book cover that I was given to work on actually at the end of 2018. It is a middle grade novel called The Invisible Boy. And it's about this 12-year-old aspiring journalist who really loves superheroes and comics. And she discovers that there is a boy next door that she's never seen. And he's just like constantly appearing and disappearing. So she automatically assumes that he is like a superhero with invisibility powers. But it turns out that the reason he keeps appearing and disappearing and being so secretive is because he's literally being trafficked by the neighbors next door. So that just went from like a really cute, like fun story to like, oh, like this is talking about a very real issue that we have in this world. So how do I portray that in like in a book cover for middle schoolers? So we went with 2 different directions. One of them being like, okay, let's try to do this in like a very minimal, like using typography and like symbolism and like very conceptual high level ideas. And another set of sketches that are using scenes, characters, and like using more illustrative scenes for the book. So they really liked the right side mostly because, you know, it attracts middle schoolers more often that way, and sales are better. So we did some color like experiments with some of those sketches, and we refined the left one because they really liked how the reflection underneath the boy is is not visible. Like that was much clearer in this one. So that's the book, and it published last year. They also put me back on to do some comics for the beginning of the chapters, just as an additional project for me. And that was I think those are my first interior illustrations of anything. So that was the book. Now I'm going to move on to an editorial project. And this was for a moving company called Hire a Helper. And it sounds really dry, but the blog and the illustrations that they commissioned for it are super fun and really cute. So I was really excited to work on this. And for this project, this was about how a bunch of Americans are leaving the country now, and where are they going? Let's talk about the data that shows everything, which seems really straightforward, right? This seems like a very straightforward illustration assignment, easy. But then I looked at it further and I'm like, all right, well, it's 2020. How do I visually depict the United States without appearing political? Do I use the White House? Do I use red, white, and blue? But that has become more of a symbol of white nationalism. This is really complicated. And how do I depict the other country without appearing without making it seem exotic or racist or even? So that was really hard. And how do I show what a moving American looks like versus a traveling American? What does an American look like? Is it a white man with blonde hair wearing an American flag t-shirt? That makes zero sense, because if we have that person, if they're such a huge fan of America, why are they leaving? So a lot of problems to solve with this. So another thing that's really helpful was to look at what kinds of illustrations this art director commissions. So here's a few where you can see that these artists, Chelsea Beck and M. Roberts, are taking these prompts either very loosely, in a very fantastical direction, or literally, but in a really sweet, cute sense. So working remotely, they're in a fairyland, or unloading a moving truck. And it's these really cute colors and this really cute couple, and it's really sweet. So that tells me, okay, I can take this into a very loose, metaphorical direction if I have to. So we talked it out with the art director, and I talked it out with the art director, and we decided that a really cool direction to go into is depicting American citizens as American animals within a human environment. So American animals in a subway. So maybe one bald eagle and some moose, deer, wolves, beavers, black bears, etc. Or maybe a fish out of water situation where we have a deer and an eagle hanging out in a desert with a bunch of parcels and boxes. And a safer option where it was a bunch of hot air balloons floating over the Atlantic Ocean, something that's not as fantastical, really. The art director really liked the human subway idea, so a very BoJack Horseman situation. However, he really, really wanted it to be a Tokyo subway, and personally, I thought Tokyo is overused as a symbol of something that's very un-American. And so we kind of went back and forth about that, and then we settled, and I'm okay, maybe not a Tokyo subway, but I can be okay with doing a subway from Seoul, South Korea, because A, I'm Korean, it felt okay, and B, Seoul subways and Tokyo subways are not extremely different, so it worked out. Colors also really helped, so I was able to use a very loose red, white, and blue palette. I know it's red, white, and pink, but almost. Colors really help to show distinguish the animals from the rest of the people. And it was also important to show what are these animals doing? Are they looking lost? Are they looking at a map? Or are they just chilling and commuting, working on their laptop, reading from a book, sleeping? So showing that these animals are in a very comfortable situation also helps that they're not travelers, they're not foreigners, they're living here, they're part of the environment as well. Okay, this next project is a little shorter. This was a recent project that I got to work with Faber-Castell. I think it's pronounced Faber-Castell. I never know. But this was super cool because for a couple reasons. So if you're not aware, Faber-Castell is this manufacturer of art supplies. And I've been wanting I never got to use them, but when I was growing up, I've always wanted to have Faber-Castell pencils. And second, if it's an art company trying to like commission an artist as like an example illustration person, then you can do whatever you want. You can draw whatever you want as long as it's not like, you know, violent or sexual or like religious or anything. So they're like, yeah, like go for it. Just draw whatever you want and like make it cool and detailed and fun. So I gave them like these three like very different ideas that are very lively and dynamic. And they really liked the first one because to them it felt like a creative parade. So we went with that one. They gave me they mailed me the art supplies to work with, and the color palettes was like pretty limited. So I actually had to like change the colors a little bit to make it work with the colors I was given. So these are some of like the process shots of working with this piece. And yeah, it came out like this. And I believe the marketing is circulating around Germany right now, but it will be in the US in June, I believe. So that was really cool. So this next project was for Columbia, and this is the last project I'm gonna be going over. The reason, so I'm gonna take a break from this one and talk about ways to find your style or ways to find inspiration. I want to go to this quote by Jillian Tamaki, who, if you do not know her, she is like one of the most important illustrators of our generation, I think. She is like a comic, like she's a cartoonist and she does illustration, and she is like, I think, the queen of experimentation, in my opinion. But this quote was supposed to be about finding ideas for concept, but I think this also applies to finding ideas for style as well. So half of style, I think, is what's already in you. Like it's like your handwriting, what feels most you in a sense, but you also have to like look around you to find ideas for, you know, like your style or your inspiration. So it's really easy to stick to like Instagram or Twitter or Dribbble or anything, but we have to look beyond that. If you're a contemporary artist and you're taking inspiration from other contemporary artists, then all of your art is going to look the same. So the smarter thing to do, in my opinion, is to look at your favorite contemporary artists or numbers of contemporary artists and look at their inspirations. Like usually they're from the past. So then you can interpret their inspirations that are from like 100 years ago and interpret that into your own voice. So for example, I used to think that, this is a slide from my friend who did her thesis at Cal Arts recently, but she talks about how we look at Dribbble and it seems like this revolutionary thing where, wow, you can make all these shapes and these icons and these animals from circles and angles and primitive shapes. But that was something that was already done 200 years ago. There are so many of these pages where Japanese artists like draw, like teach other people how to draw like these animals starting from like circles and all these primitive shapes. So it wasn't invented by Dribbble, it was invented 200 years ago. So it's really, if you're ever stuck for inspiration, look at your favorite artists, find out who they're inspired by, and like take inspiration from those. So for me, one of my favorite artists is Victo Nye, and I think she was one of the first inspirations that I had when I started illustrating again. So, I mean, I'm not saying that Victo Nye is like directly inspired by Hokusai, but there's a lot of like, if you look at Victo Nye's work and you look at Japanese woodblock artists, they're pretty similar, I think. And so it really helps to, you know, like know that, you know, your favorite artist is probably like not copying, but like taking heavy inspiration from artists from like hundreds of years ago. So for this assignment that I showed earlier, I was taking a lot of inspiration from Art Deco and Art Nouveau, people like J. Carlos, Coleman Moser, Erte, and I took my own like spin on that, and that is how I came up with like this style that I've never used before, but it was a really fun way to experiment. And just like looking through the past, like what was already out there rather than like copying what's trending today. So you probably noticed that my work like this looks nothing like this. And this is just the way I like doing comics for some reason. I like working in this very like rendered, like monochromatic approach. And this is just how I've been doing things. On the top left is a comic I did with PBS that came out this year. And the bottom right is a comic I was working on with Adam Ellis, who is like one of those Instagram comic artists recently. And it's just like my mood. It's just like what I want. There's no formula for how I draw styles or anything. It's just like changing my handwriting. It's like, this is just what I feel like doing. So I'm just going to do it. I want to talk about, hang on. Okay. So I want to talk about like finding your style and like how to how to distinguish like your voice from your style. So your voice is like what or why you draw something. It's like your purpose, what inspires you. Like, do you like drawing fantasy? Do you like drawing about current events? Or do you like drawing like portraits? Or your style is like how you take that purpose and it's how you manifest it. So do you draw on digital? Do you like to paint and everything? So I think the best artists like change your style a lot. Like they're constantly experimenting and constantly evolving, but your storytelling technique and your voice like always stays the same. It's pretty, if it doesn't stay the same, it changes very gradually over time. And it's like, I think some of the greatest artists are the ones who can work in so many different styles and you can tell it's them. So Jillian Tamaki, like this is all her. She used to work in like these really gorgeous, like very detailed inks. She does collage. She works like with this very like flat like lines and colors, and it's still her. It's just like the way she like wants to draw, and it's just her way of experimenting. I also want to talk about what happens if you feel like somebody's copying you. I had a situation when I was a freshman at school, actually, where this girl in my class was like kind of like copying every single page I was doing. It was kind of weird because I would draw and then I would turn around and she would have this exact same thing. And it was really annoying for a while because I was like, what are you doing? And it was just really uncomfortable and I was really frustrated by it. But looking back, nobody owns the way you draw. Like nobody owns a style. You can't copyright a style. It's just at the end of the day, you're the one that's ahead of the curve because while they're trying to catch up to you, you're already moving on to something else. So if you're trying to copy a trend and you're practicing to get to that trend, everyone else already moved on. So it's just it's not a sustainable way to work. And eventually that person got bored and started copying other things. So it's just a lose-lose situation for them. And if you're the one who's copying, like I used to copy too, and like try to emulate other people's styles. And it's like trying a new handwriting. It feels really cool. And it feels like, oh, this can be something I can do. But then it gets harder to continue that. It takes a lot of time to replicate that style. And over the years or months, you might realize, this is actually a lot of work and it's a dead end for me. I don't know where to go from here. So I think time will tell if you're trying to copy a style because it's a trend or because your favorite artist is doing it and it's just not working. Like that's something that you'll figure out over the months or weeks or days. So, and I think the best way to avoid copying styles like directly is to look at like a million different artists that you look up to. And instead of wanting to copy one person, I think that will really help you to look at other artists who are look at other artists who are like using their own voices and using their own experimentation, and that will influence you to find your own voice rather than copy somebody else's. Okay, that is it from me. Thank you so much for coming. You can always email me at hello@debleeart.com. I also have socials at JWL on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was an insane experience, and I'm really thankful that I was asked to do this. So thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. There we go. Cool.
Deb, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing, an amazing talk. Jacqueline, do you want to start off the Q&A? Before we do, I will invite all of you to put more questions, comments that you have in the chat. We've got a few that we'll get to, but Jacqueline, start us off.
Yeah. Yeah, also that was an amazing talk. Thank you so much. I'm curious, so much of your work is so personal to you. How do you go about like receiving professional critique without taking it personally?
I think it's also the way that critique is given. I think it's a mix of receiving critique and being like, okay, like this isn't me. It's just like the thing I drew and I'm gonna just draw something else later. It's no big deal. But I think it's also the way you give critique that's also really important. So rather than saying like, oh, this is bad or this is good, is it like, it's like how we learned how to critique at the School of Design. It's like, I don't understand what this piece is saying, or versus like, I hate it, or versus like, I don't really like, this is hard for me to navigate visually because I think this piece is too big, versus like, I hate it. You know, like it's just very, it has to be like a two-way conversation rather than like very subjective, like this is good or this is bad. But at the end of the day, I think the more and more I draw, the more I realize like, this isn't my kid. I have a million kids, and like it's okay if like, you know, one thing is bad and one thing doesn't work, and it's just more drawings at the end of the day are successful. More drawings are successful than others, and it's just something that I think you get better at as you continue illustrating or drawing. Yeah. Was that helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bunch of questions here. One of them is something that I wanted to ask myself. Melinda Johnson's asking how you think your education into design informs your more creative approach to your career now. I was wondering that myself. As you were speaking, I was thinking, you know, what would she say? Did she have all the success because of CMU or in spite of CMU? I mean, Dylan aside, but can you point to certain things in the education that you got that that have informed your work and helped your work?
Definitely definitely being very like conceptual and using like, it's hard to explain because I think CMU design really taught me how to think in a very objective like design sense. Like, is this something that someone will understand rather than like, is this something that's indulgent, which like indulgence is okay to me, but I think a lot like learning how to critique my own work in the way that the School of Design has taught me has been really helpful that way. But I really do think a lot of it honestly was like my own, like along with like having like the jump start of like having a full-time job after graduating and everything, like was very integral for me to have like a solid illustration practice like pretty quickly. Because I think if it weren't for, you know, design or free or like being able to apply design and like my illustration stuff, which actually helped me get NPR and LinkedIn and everything, like everything would have gotten a lot slower, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We have a high school junior.
Oh, what?
Chloe, would you mind? Can I allow you to talk and you ask your question to Deb directly? Because I think it's a good one. I'm gonna turn your mic on. Go ahead.
Hi, Chloe.
And welcome, Chloe.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
being here.
So my question again, I'm a high school junior right now. My question says I'm looking at colleges right now and going through the same experience of like trying to balance pursuing what I love, which is design, while keeping my Asian immigrant parents happy. So, so what's something you wish you kept in mind, or like any advice you have for like going through that process of choosing a path to take and like looking at programs to potentially pursue?
So I think like something that I see that like happens a lot is like actually looking at the program that you're applying to and seeing if it aligns with what you want to do. Because I think a lot of us in our design class like wanted to do something that was more like branding or like very like learning how to make typefaces and everything. But I think that was something that in particular the CMU School of Design wasn't really focusing on. It was more focusing on like designing for like the broader of society as like as a whole. So but I think also like if you are in like a school and you decide to do something else, like that it will force you to work harder, right? Like I think like that's a sort of a test to see like if you really want something, like you're gonna work for it. Because you have a lot of people in who are actual illustrators who went to illustration school that realized like, oh shoot, like maybe this isn't something that I want to do, or like they take the professors and the resources for granted. But like if that is something that if illustration is something or whatever you want to do is something that you truly want to do, then that's like your test to like work especially hard. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank
Well,
you.
Thanks for being here. And since that works so well with me being able to how to figure out the microphone stuff, I'm going to bring in Langston next. Langston, I'm going to bring you in to ask your question, okay? This is great when you guys are asking in person instead of me asking.
Oh, wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hey, thank you for talking. This is awesome.
Thank you.
I have looked at your work many times. So this is exciting. I'm a junior in C right now.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
so yeah, I guess my question is like when I've talked to a lot of illustrators in the past, they talk about like their portfolio is set up in a way where like they have like an illustration, they have like an editorial page, they have like a background art page, they have like different pages for different things, and they're all in like specific styles because like publishers or editors are looking for you just to recreate that style and don't really give you any time for like experimentation, like because you're hiring you to do it like on a time frame. So I guess my question is like, how do you begin a career based on experimentation? Kind of like what you talked about with like Jillian Tamaki, where she's like very experimental in her approach versus like sticking rigidly just to one style, just so you can find constant work throughout, especially when you're starting out initially.
I think I remember when I look at Julian Tamaki's work, and I can't really speak for her, but a lot of her earlier work was very like pretty academic. It stuck to like real it stuck to like more traditional kinds of illustration and shows that, you know, she can draw and she has like all the technical skills to like do like to like perform like very like realistic and very like beautiful pieces. But it feels like when you do that a lot and people start trusting you and they start giving you assignments and you start having a relationship with art directors and stuff, then they trust you more to like experiment with them. Like they feel they're part of your artistic journey, and that's when you start doing more like weirder or experimental stuff, and like you try that with one person, and if it works out then you try it with more people. So I don't know, it's interesting because I started out trying to be as experimental as possible, like especially like earlier in my real career, and then I started like going back like and trying to do more like detailed things because I just realized that's what I like doing. It's not like I like experimentation to a certain extent, but it's like I want to, you know, it's also just nice to like be able to draw like really detailed and indulgent things, which is something I think I realized I really like doing recently. But yeah, I do see a lot of illustrators who have like background art, editorial. If you're talking about like which page to show, like I think it's whatever work you're most excited about. So if you're a background artist, but you want to go into editorial, for example, then like it probably makes more sense to like show your editorial work first and then your backgrounds later, because like, but it's whatever things you want to draw first is what you should put at top. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Deb.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Langston. Molly, please ask your question. It's a great question.
Hey there, it's great to
Molly.
see you. Hi.
Hi.
Man, I mean, you are just so inspiring. And from here in Pittsburgh, I have been cheering you on, and it's just been great to see everything you're doing. You are really great. So my question for you, let me see if I can pull it up again, is I had you as a student both in service design and senior studio, I think in the same year.
Yes.
And right around that time, I had this thought, especially around senior studio, which is we need to get out of the way so that she can do the work that she wants to do. And it's interesting for me to hear, you know, the joy and drive to developing your illustration work that was going on outside of class. And I think that Kristen and I certainly knew that. So one question I've got is, how can instructors like us support students who are like you were at that time, who are finding their way and finding their way to the thing that's really going to move them, but that might be outside of what we're doing at that moment, exactly what we're teaching at that time?
I guess it's just like having an open conversation, like asking them what's inspiring to them, and like if there's anything that they're inspired by, like having that conversation of like, can I see it, and like what is it that you're like, why is it so inspiring to you, and like just having a relationship with that student where it's like understanding, like, I don't know, I think it's just about having a very open conversation about that, because I know it's really hard, especially if it's in an area where, you know, you might not where it's not in the area of expertise. But I think showing that even though it's not something that is being taught, it's just very interesting, and like maybe seeing like how design can possibly influence that work too. Because I mean, even like in illustration, like I still use elements of graphic design, and thinking about how this will affect people like in a grander scheme of things, to inform my work as well. But yeah, does that help? I'm trying. I have a better. I have a better answer for this, but like it's hard to put it into words. It's very like loose and like kind of fluffy in the air. Like
I take loose and fluffy. That's okay.
Okay.
But I'd add to it that I think you teach us a lot too, and that was part of the, you know, one of the really wonderful things about seeing where your work is now and where it was then. I think that working with you teaches all of us, and also everyone else who takes a slightly different path through design. Congratulations.
Thank you, Molly. That's really kind of you.
Thank you, Molly. And I would echo that. I was just so inspired by you, just trying to figure it out, right? Just being so resilient and saying, here's where I am, but this is where I want to be, and just working and figuring it out.
Yeah, I think I'm still figuring it out too, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's never gonna finalize, I think.
Saren, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Would you mind asking your question? Oh, Saren's asking, what do you think stood out in your portfolio when you were putting it all together? And any advice to these students that are getting ready to go out for internships or jobs in terms of building their portfolio? I know you talked a little bit about this with Langston, but anything else with that?
Making it really accessible, and like making sure it, like the vessel that you're using your portfolio on is like easy to navigate, and like your email is like easy, your contact info is really easy to find, and like it's easy to navigate through the work. I think design helps a lot in this, because if you have like really beautiful work but like the site just does not work, then it's like they're not gonna like try. Like a lot of art directors and people who are trying to hire are moving really, really fast, and they're trying to like understand who you are as an artist and your work as soon as possible. So making sure that everything is readable and usable and like accessible is really, really helpful. And I think that's what helped me with design as well, is to understand that, even though I might be using it pretty minimally, but like it's still good to have a very usable portfolio, a vessel for your work.
Andrew, how about asking your question?
Sure. Hi, Deb. Great to see
Hi.
you. Really wonderful. The question I have is, who do you consider to be your contemporary peers, and how do they influence your work today?
A lot of my peers, it's kind of funny because I think I put them a lot in the last slide. Some of them. So I think it's like people like who I follow on like social, who are also like in the same stage of their careers, like running into the same problems with like some like finicky art directors, and like we just like help each other, like talk about like, oh shoot, they didn't pay on time, like what do we do, and just like help each other with that. But I think it's also important to have peers who are like, you know, also like further ahead in your career further ahead than I am in my career, but also people who are like just starting as well. So I heard in the podcast that it's really good to have like a mix of all of them. But I think right now, like the relationships that I have with people in my illustration friends, which is also why I'm moving to Brooklyn, is for that. But just like people helping each other. I think that's where the best relationships come, is like if you can help somebody, but they also help you too. So that's why it's really helpful to have like a group of friends who are in the same part of your career as you, but also ones who like can offer you guidance, and others who are also just getting started, so you can potentially help them as well. So yeah.
Diana, can you use Christiane's computer to ask your question? I think it's a really good one.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I had a question about how your like pitch meeting or discussion you have with authors is different from UX design. So, and if there's anything that you learned from UX design pitch meeting that you brought into illustration process, and then vice versa, is there anything that UX designers can learn from illustration industry?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's actually a lot, and I can go into this very deeply, but I think the first part of your question was about like how UX design can inform like writing or illustrating, or is it the other way around?
So I'm interested in how you talk about your work. Do you present them and let the work speak for itself, or do you start by talking about like your thinking behind it? Because I know UX is a lot about like scoping and figuring out this is where I'm coming from, and it's a lot of work whenever you have to pitch that idea.
Right, for like writing your process and everything, like on a Medium blog and everything.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think with illustration, most people I see like either have like just the image, because usually like in editorial illustration, especially, you want the image to speak for itself. It's like the illustration is something that your eye gravitates to, and you're like, oh, I think I can get an idea of what the story is about. But most of the time, it's just people who, most of the time, like I think what people have is like, you have an image and you have a very quick blurb of like, what is the story about, like less than one sentence, and then like who art directed it. But I think when you want to have like very big process blogs about illustration is when you are potentially developing like, what is like when you're making a huge project for like, especially a tech company. Like if a tech company reaches out and they're like, hey, we want you to help inform our illustration style, then yeah, it makes sense to have like a very long process blog about like how you get to where you are, because it's a very iterative process, which I don't think illustration isn't as iterative as design, in my opinion. So I think that's why people don't have long process blogs about their illustrations as much as they do about their design work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking.
We had an anonymous question. I was wondering if you hadn't blown up with the book deals and everything like that, do you think it's possible to still have a day job and be doing illustration work, you know, when you have the time to do that? Is it possible to maintain those two careers as long as you have the success that you have had?
Thank you. For sure. I think, I mean, the books is what made me be like, I gotta go, because, you know, they were like their own full-time jobs. But I know plenty of illustrators who have full-time jobs working like as like art directors or like illustrators or designers in tech or something. And they still have, you know, occasional freelance jobs that come up every now and then. There are plenty of illustrators who work in tech who still draw for the New York Times like on like a very regular like basis. And I think it's helpful that editorial turnarounds are really fast. It's usually like less than a week. So it's not a huge commitment. But books, however, like huge are like they take years. So that's why it was like, okay, well, I have this lump sum that I got from like this book deal. So I'm able to survive on it for a little while if I can't work for a while for some time. But even like having a book deal is like, I still have to find work during my time as like a freelance illustrator. So it's like while I'm working on this graphic novel, I still have to find projects to do during the book so I can like, you know, like survive.
I was really struck by when you talked about the graphic novel that you're doing for yourself and sort of the parameters that you set up for yourself, saying, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be this honest, I'm going to be this open, I'm going to talk about these things. It's such a personal project that I'm sure will resonate with a wider audience. But who are you presenting the story to? Who other than maybe your editor, who are you getting feedback from when you write such a personal story like that?
So my editor definitely, and some of my friends who are also comic artists, I also reach out to, and like I, you know, like ask humbly for their time because it takes a long time to edit those things. Just like I think over winter break, I got to the halfway point of the book and I was like, all right, this is halfway done. I'm going to send it to like some friends who are interested in looking at it and like compile all their feedback, because they're also illustrators, but I'm also asking people who don't do illustration to read it as like a pure reader and get their idea and like what they're gaining from the book. So it's like a mix of like different audience of like different people, because editors are also really overworked. So a lot of the times, like sometimes editors don't get back to people for like a month sometimes. So when it's a month past, it's kind of too late. So it's really important to have like a group of like trusted friends who can give you the most honest feedback that they can, that, you know, because the worst thing that a peer reader can do is sugarcoat it, right? That's the worst thing. So having friends who are very honest and being like, I don't understand this part. You need, like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, that is the best feedback I can possibly get.
Jacqueline, do you have another question? I wasn't sure if you had something.
I think it's mostly covered.
Okay.
And then we just had a request, Deb, if you wouldn't mind putting your social media.
Oh yeah, I can put it in the chat.
And this has been great. Real quick, it came in anonymous. What's next for you? do you even think in those terms? Like, do you even think about like what's next?
I can tell you that my last book that I'm working on with that editor that I was talking about is coming out in 2027. I'll be 31 years old. So that is that's like as far as like I can see. But right now I'm trying to like get my wisdom teeth taken out on Wednesday, moving next week to Brooklyn, and just like trying to survive. And like there's a few projects that are lined up that I don't think I can talk about right now, but it's going to be a busy year. If I can make it to the middle of May, then I'm set.
Great. And do you still wake up every morning thinking, what am I drawing today? What am I going to draw today?
Honestly, not as much. I mean, like, to be honest, I'm quite burned out right now. So I think like what's going to be really good to be in Brooklyn is like being with all my friends and who are, not in illustration and also in illustration, just to like force each other to like recharge and like, let's go on picnics and like, let's walk each other's dogs if we get them, and just like trying to be alive. And I'm trying, and like, I do try to make time for like when I can. This week was the first week I had in a long time where I was able to just like relax. So that's when I started like actually drawing for myself. And it's been a long time since I've been able to do that, which is the caveat of being a freelance illustrator. There's a running joke in like in illustration Twitter where it's like, I can't wait to finish drawing so I can start drawing, like it's like that. It's like a lot of burnout, unfortunately. And sometimes I do have to remember, like, why do I like drawing again? But I think that's what it is for like most jobs. But at the end of the day, I would rather not be doing anything else professionally. But yeah, that's my take on that.
Thank you so much for everything. Being here, really appreciate it. It was just super inspiring. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Deb.
All right, take care. Have a good week.
All right, take care.
Bye.